A few miles out to sea, astride the entrance to Plymouth Sound, lies this great breakwater. It was one of the building wonders of the early 19th century. It was built because during the 18th century, with this great build-up of shipping because of the increasing size of the dockyards, more and more ships were using Plymouth Sound as an anchorage. Unfortunately, they soon found that during times of storm, great surges of seas would come pouring in from the channel into the Sound, tearing these ships from their anchorages and wrecking them on the cliffs beneath Plymouth Hoe. So it was decided to build a breakwater right astride the entrance. They started this structure in the year 1812, an enormous venture. The engineers originally decided to build it with slopes of 1 in 3. But nature took a hand in this and kept redistributing the stone on the surface of the sea. And in the end, the engineers had to compromise with nature and indulge in a slope of 1 in 5, which is roughly what it is today. Well, this meant an enormous extension of the work, and altogether it took 29 years to complete. And incidentally, it incorporates 4.5 million tons of stone. But with its completion, Plymouth Sound became the great safe anchorage which it is today. I made, incidentally, a fascinating calculation about the cost of the construction of this breakwater. It cost to quarry, to ship, and to put in position 6 and 8 pence per ton. Now, you couldn't buy a brick for that price these days, I don't think. Anyhow, when it was completed, we had this great, safe, deep water anchorage. But one other thing. In the 19th century, this breakwater became a very favourite place for promenading. The sort of place, if you lived in the 1890s, you'd bring your young lady along to take her for a walk. But nowadays, very few people indeed visit this breakwater. They sit up on Plymouth Hoe and look out to sea at it. One of the things that does puzzle them while they're doing that is this peculiar structure here. Well, its purpose basically is very simple indeed. It acts as a beacon to guide shipping across the eastern end of the breakwater. But it does serve a dual purpose. As you'll see, right at the top is a great iron cage. Now, this was constructed as a haven for anyone who might happen to be shipwrecked on the breakwater. They could climb up into this cage and, of course, then be completely safe from the great seas which will surge over this during times of storm and high water. Well, from a place visited by very few to one that must be seen by tens of thousands of people every day. It's these ruins, the ruins of Charles Church. They're situated in the middle of a roundabout, right on the edge of Plymouth city centre. And they must puzzle a lot of people. And well, they might, because it's a church with a very strange beginning and a very strange ending. The people of Plymouth in the 1640s petitioned Charles I for the right to build this church, and he gave them this by act in the year 1641. But you know, it's indicative of the vanity of this monarch that he incorporated in the act the condition that it should not be named St. Charles, but named after himself. So it is Charles Church. Well, the people got on with the work straight away, but before long, those same work people had to put down their tools to join the citizen army, which Plymouth was assembling to help parliamentarians go to war with this same Charles I. Extraordinary, really. But there it was. They were committed to war. Within a few years, Charles was defeated. He lost his throne. He lost his head. Well, after the war was over, the people got on with building the church again. And I suppose it's to their credit as law-abiding citizens that, in spite of the fact that they had lots of reasons for hating this Charles I, after all he besieged their town for about 3 years, they still named this church after him. So it's Charles Church. Well, it started in an unusual fashion in a war, and it ended likewise in a war. In the last war, in fact. Charles, like half the churches of Plymouth, was destroyed, gutted. Well, now, what we decided to do is to keep it here in this roundabout as a permanent memorial to the many Plymouth citizens who lost their lives in the last war. Perhaps a very fitting use to which to put it. Charles I then made his mark on Plymouth with a church. But up here on Plymouth Hoe, his son, Charles II, left a much more substantial reminder of his authority in the form of the Royal Citadel. This gateway, by the way, is considered to be one of the finest examples of Baroque architecture in the whole of England. And it leads into what must be one of the finest fortresses in the whole of Europe. These ramparts are 3/4 of a mile long, and in places they're 70 feet thick. It's a thought, you know, that even with the weapons of the last war, this fortification could have taken a tremendous pounding and still survived. I've never been able to find any record anywhere, though, of a shot ever being fired in anger from this huge fortification. Well, now, work started on it in 1666. It took some years to complete, of course. This is under the direction of Charles II. And I suppose it wasn't surprising to the people of Plymouth, when they were permitted to walk around these ramparts, in view of what they did to Charles II's father, wasn't surprising at all for them to note that many of the gun emplacements were directed not out to sea, but down upon the town of Plymouth itself. Charles II was quite determined to ensure that if he fell out with this awkward tribe down there, he'd be in a position, unlike his father, to pound them into surrender. Well, there are two other points I'd like to make before I leave these ramparts. The first is this great citadel was almost certainly built on land which once was the playing place of the people of Plymouth. That drill square down there, incidentally, almost certainly was the site where Sir Francis Drake and his fellow captains once played that famous game of bowls before going out to beat the Spanish Armada. There's one other thought too. I can find no record of the people of Plymouth ever being recompensed for the seizure of their land. So I think it'd be rather a good idea while I'm here if I try to collect, shall we say, 300 years back ground rent. Or perhaps they'd like to give us the citadel instead.